So I want to talk again about this sense of right versus wrong, um, from an energetic sense instead of a moral sense. And this seems pretty critical for me because there's a fear of getting it wrong, partly because of many times when I felt I got it wrong. And getting it wrong here just means, I think it just means you're following a path and you keep getting pulled off that path. You keep giving in to the temptation to getting distracted, or you get tested and you don't rise up to the challenge. You keep falling out of alignment. And again, alignment just being, are you staying on the path or are you getting pulled off track? So that's right versus wrong in a relative sense. There is no right and wrong in the ultimate sense, because who's to judge? Um, the ultimate sense being it exists outside of you, it exists independently of you, and that's a subjective thing. That's not, it's not separate from us. So um, putting that aside, how do you know when you're on the right path for you, and how do you know when you're off it? And for me, it's always felt like tuning into something and you just kind of become lit. You just, you could say vibrate or radiate, but you just become lit. Something just activates, is stronger, feels more alive. Um, and maybe that's not exactly quite the right way to say it, but um, it's not exactly on point, but it's close. And as I've said before, the response you get, you could say, from life or the universe is um, greater flow, greater ease, for the most part. And at some point, something seems to come to test you. Whether that's actually testing you or not, that's the question, but it seems to be, from your side of things, that something comes up in life to test you, to test maybe your commitment, maybe if you've learned the lesson prior. Um, it shows up at some point, and it could be a minor test, it could be a big test. And I think usually it starts as a minor test and then builds up if you keep resisting it, if you keep resisting the lesson or the growth, whatever that represents. And resisting it usually means, in my experience, it usually means you sort of fall back to a prior level, and the path kind of recreates itself. It's not exactly the same. It maybe is still going in the same direction, generally speaking, but something seems different. It's not the same path you just walked, it's changed. And how much has changed, that's also a good question, but and it's maybe impossible to know for sure. But at the very least, it feels like it's changed, and the bigger the test, I think that you fail, the more it seems like your path changes. Now, that might not be completely true. I think it's true in some way. It seems like at the very least, you're building momentum in a certain direction, and that accumulates. And if you meet a test and you fail it, you disrupt that momentum to some degree. And so at the very least, it creates a delay. Potentially, it creates a new direction too. I think the universe reroutes itself, and you have to kind of take a different orientation to maybe get to the same place, or maybe the place you get to is a little different, or maybe it's completely different. Possibly that all depends, but something has changed. You don't know how much exactly. For me, the fear was always, has this completely changed my path? And yeah, just feeling confused about, okay, what do I do now? I felt like this was the clear way to go. What now? So coming back to right versus wrong, there's a pathological element to this. If you're constantly questioning this, if you're creating more distress around a perceived wrong than there needs to be. Because in my experience, the more I attack myself and feel ashamed or feel pathetic for making what seems like a wrong decision, the more it cements that and creates more of it. It just keeps it stuck, I guess you could say, and it creates more of that kind of energy and more of that pattern. It perpetuates itself. And it seems like when I'm forgiving of myself, and sometimes of others, depending on the context, and I can accept myself for what happened, just let it go. It seems like it's easier to keep the momentum going. But If I don't do that, inevitably I get stuck in that pattern of self-blame, hurt, depression, anxiety, fear, and it creates more of that, and it keeps me stuck. The anger comes from in one sense, it comes from feeling like I keep making the same mistake over again. But it originally came from, which, as I'm saying, is part of this whole pattern. It originally came from, I think, just feeling like I have to get it right the first time, and perfectionism. I think that's where it kind of starts. And a fear of proving to myself that I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, strong enough, resourceful enough, whatever. I'm not enough to do whatever I'm doing, to go down this direction. I'm not enough to be a good lover. I'm not enough to be a good business person. I'm not enough to be spiritual or be an adventurer or whatever, which in a sense is just kind of more fundamental to just I'm not enough. And it creates this anxiety and frustration, and it feeds a story more if I see what I take to be evidence that I'm not enough because I didn't measure up in that particular scenario. And instead of forgiving myself, learning and letting it go and just moving on, there'd be this kind of rage at myself or life, rage mostly at myself, and hurt, sometimes disgust. Sometimes that was merited, sometimes I needed to feel that. But I think it's part of like a deeper lesson of just learning from the experience and then just doing better next time, letting it go, moving forward. And sometimes I was able to do that, and sometimes I wasn't. So there's a lot of anger and heaviness around that, and there just wasn't something that clicked in place for me that I don't have to get this the first time. I don't have to get it right or perfect on the first try. And the most important things, they're often a process. They're not something that is just black and white, like you just get it right away. It's a process, and I might have an initial breakthrough, and that's awesome, and then hit a wall. That wall doesn't mean that I failed, and it doesn't mean that I fucked up. It just means here's an obstacle, here's something to look at. This is where the process is taking me. It's not an end, and it's not the kind of wall that I think it is. It's just, this is just the next step. And I just haven't figured out yet how to get through it. And that's part of the process. That's part of maturity and growing up. You meet a challenge and you figure it out. Maybe you figure it out logically, and sometimes maybe it's just you surrender to it, or let it move through you, or something like that. Like, but either way, you figure it out, and you engage with the process. You meet it where it's at, and you get to know it. You try to understand, why is this here? What's this revealing? And then you do your best to just keep moving. And it feels like, and I keep saying it feels like because it's just so subjective, but it feels like that's a process up to this point, have never fully completed with anything. At least with the most important things. And every time a wall comes up, I guess I just feel like I don't have what it takes to get past it. And sometimes I just take it as proof that I failed, or as proof that this is a closure rather than a test. So I turn around and I go back. And sometimes there's a side path that kind of appears right next to it. So I don't have to necessarily go backwards. It's just rerouting. It's just taking a different route. And I refuse that route sometimes. And I just think the only path available to me is just to go backwards. And I've done this so many times. It feels almost hopeless. It's almost like it's just so automatic. I have zero control over it. That's what one part of me says. But if that were true, I know people who've been able to do this kind of thing. They've met the wall, they've overcome it or gone past it. They've been able to keep moving. And if they can do it, why can't I? And I know what the voice says, this part of me, it says, well, because there's something fundamentally wrong with you. It's because you're autistic. It's because you have ADHD. It's because of your trauma. It's because of your genetics. It's because of a curse that was put on you, maybe. It's because of your astrology. It's because of karma. So it has all these excuses and reasons. And at my weaker points, some of them seem convincing. And there might be a bit of truth to some of them. I think certain things make this process more difficult. doesn't mean it makes it impossible. I have a sticky mind, and when I don't take care of myself, this mind tends to fixate on things in an unhealthy way, in a way that's trying to cope, but it just sticks and it gets stuck on something. And if it's stuck on, it actually doesn't matter what it's stuck on, really. This kind of stickiness that I'm talking about, this rigidity, it's kind of like a pressured focus that feels tense and strained, and it feels like a coping mechanism to escape anxiety. And it feels, when I'm really thick in it and I'm not taking care of myself, it's extremely hard to pull myself out of that. I know how to do it, and I've done it many, many times, but it's a skill, and if I give into it and I don't practice that skill, it makes it harder to pull myself out of it. So that can kind of interrupt this whole process. That's one thing. Distractibility is another thing. Getting pulled in to temptation, getting sucked into my phone or whatever, or drama. And it's kind of the flip side of the same coin of that stuckness I mentioned. It's the same thing. It's a coping mechanism in large part. When I'm not taking care of myself, it's a coping mechanism to, escape something, escape myself, escape some sense of fear and anxiety. It usually never quite feels good. It feels just like there's sort of a pressure to that too, in a way. Neither one of those feels good. And yeah, and I think there might be energetic things too about this. I think in a sense we can kind of curse ourselves, create ill intentions of ourselves that become self-fulfilling. So that's probably part of this too. So yeah, all of these things, they can happen, but it's not they're not impossible to navigate, because I've been able to navigate each one. At the very least, I've been able to navigate each one separately and successfully, as if I'm actually listening to, you could say, my inner compass, if I'm actually trusting myself and I'm taking care of myself. If I'm doing that, I can navigate those things. If I'm not doing that, it does feel impossible, and in a sense it is impossible, because you have to have the strength and the capacity to do that. And you can't, it's impossible to pull yourself out of those things just purely with the intellect. It's impossible to do that. You need that on your side. You need to be able to see things clearly. That is part of it, but it's impossible to do it just with trying to think your way out of it. You can't. Um, I've tried many times trying to think my way out of it, and sometimes it makes it worse. Um, there's a way to do it, and again, it comes back to that detachment, detaching from thoughts, detaching from feelings, holding space, and then from sort of a spaciousness, being able to see through the story. It's a different quality of energy, you could say. It's a different quality, but trying to force your way out of these stuck habits um, just by thinking out of it doesn't work. So, at least for me. So, and sometimes a little thought can kind of create a little space. A little thought, like a question, like, is this true? Or a little thought of, like, has there ever been a situation before where this wasn't the case? Or have I ever come out of this successfully in the past? Or even just a little bit of just observing, just a little bit of like, okay, that's a thought, that's the story, okay, and just putting it at a little distance. It creates a buffer, but you need energy, you need capacity to be able to, I think, fully process something or pull yourself out of that stuck pattern more fully. But even just a little bit of that, I think it does create some momentum. You just have to add to the momentum. You still have to take care of yourself. You can't just do that. You have to also, go for a walk or get some sunlight, practice breathing, eat healthy, take a hot bath, write, whatever you need to do, take some kind of action that builds momentum too. So, and that kind of comes from trusting your instinct, trusting, listening to the inner compass, how it's guiding you, where it's pulling you towards, and also maybe having sort of a mental checklist of what are the things that bring me energy, what are the things that ground me, what are the things that support me and sustain me. In doing those things, picking at least one or a few of those things to do that same day, and grounding and restoring energy through doing that, and then continuing to do that each day, even if it's just one thing a day, and then stacking it up a little bit at a time, just stacking it up, rebuilding momentum, and then from there it accelerates, it compounds. The thing is, there's a compounding effect, and you have to keep adding to it, but once you reach a certain threshold, it takes off and it has its own momentum again, and now you just have to kind of feed it. Now the ball's rolling, you just have to kind of keep feeding it and let it keep rolling, and then you will, in my experience, you will face some kind of test or wall or obstacle or something again at some point. And for myself, I think I just have to remember it's part of the process. It's not a sign of failure. It's not a sign that I'm not enough. I just have to kind of stick with it. If I reach a block, stick with it. And it feels abstract to talk about this right now because, like I said, I haven't fully gone through this process and come out the other side, but I've come right up to the edge of it and come close. And I think I think that's really the biggest mistake, just giving up and turning around, um, and not sticking with it. And part of that is you have to continue the self-care, because I think there's an alarm system that can sometimes come on, especially if you have this deep fear of failure, where your anxiety kicks in and you're like, oh shit, I fucked up, oh, I don't have what it takes. And then you want to get pulled back into all your old habits, all your old beliefs and patterns, as a way to like self-soothe or cope, which is really just, those are just addictive patterns that don't work. And it pulls you backwards. It pulls you back into the prior version of yourself, or the prior life you had. And that temptation can be huge when you're having that full-on anxiety and doubt. But that's when you really need to stay firm in doing your self-care, not your coping, but your self-care, which is, again, going back to that list, what gives me energy, what replenishes me, what grounds me, and sticking with that, relying on that, not on the addictive patterns. So sticking with that, um, and then having that groundedness and that replenishment from whatever that is, whether it's nature or meditation, or a hot bath or whatever, then I think the other half of that is just sticking with it. And it seems like the way to solve a problem is you sit with it, you tinker with it, you explore, you're open to your intuition and your logic, both. You let them both guide you. When I was studying business, the way that I was taught this by mentors and from books and stuff, they all had the same message basically, is you keep reiterating. You try something, you experiment, you do the one thing that is within reach. The next step, you just find what the next step is, and you do that, and it doesn't have to be a huge thing, it's just whatever the next thing is. You don't overthink it, you don't make it perfect or ideal, it's just what's the next most practical thing you can do. You do that as soon as possible, you experiment, then you reflect and get feedback. You take a step back, you reevaluate, and then you reiterate. So it's basically identify the next step, experiment, reevaluate, reiterate. It's those 4 things. And you keep doing those things over and over. You don't expect to get it all at once. Most businesses fail, not because most business people fail, not because they're inherently failures or that they didn't have what it takes, because they gave up too soon and they didn't reiterate. That's the message that I constantly got. And it's true with art and creativity, and I've heard this from spiritual teachers too, about the spiritual process, the awakening process. It seems like it's just a universal life principle that applies to almost any kind of endeavor, even relationships and dating. So yeah, identify the next step, experiment, reevaluate, reiterate. And you just keep doing that over and over and over again, keep cycling through over and over again until something clicks, until things align. And I think from an alchemical perspective, what this really means is you're working on something that seems to be external to you, or even if it's a spiritual process, which I think most of us, in a weird way, even though we know it's internal, we still kind of externalize it. But anyways, whatever it is, there's like something kind of external that you're doing. Writing, art, business, relationships, whatever. And going through this process to reiterate isn't just refining that, it's refining yourself too. It's both. So alchemy would say, it's a mutual process, and that external thing is a vehicle for you to engage with that process and to mature, learn, potentially transform. So that's me. So that's intellectualizing it. It makes sense logically. It's what I've been taught by several different people. And I guess I kept forgetting this. Each time I met this wall, thinking would just fly out the window, and I would just give into the anxiety and feel this temptation to fall back into my old coping mechanisms. And it got to a place where I was starting to do more of the self-care instead, and was able to bounce back much quicker. Because when you do the self-care piece of this, and trusting your inner guidance, when you do that, it creates a lot of resilience. You're able to bounce back much more quickly, sometimes the same day. If you get good at this, you can bounce back on the same day, or within a week. And then it's like you're good again. For the most part, you're good again. You're on a roll again. The momentum has already rebuilt itself, and you just kind of keep going. And there's other things with this too. I think there's energetic currents. You could say the timing of it, stuff like that. But yeah, the more you rely on that self-care instead of the coping, the more you bounce back. So I was starting to get good at that, but I think I was half realizing, but not fully realizing, I guess, is that one of my ironically biggest coping mechanisms wasn't necessarily all of these external habits of like trying to hook up with someone, or overeating, or like going out to eat, or binging Netflix, or binging my phone. Those weren't necessarily the worst coping mechanisms. For me, the worst one was probably more internal. It was probably an addictive thought loop of self-abuse, which you wouldn't think of as a coping mechanism, but it is. Self-abuse, it's almost like this masochistic, I don't even want to say pleasure, but this masochistic temptation. And maybe it's like kind of akin to someone who cuts themselves, because people who cut themselves, they're not it's not really about trying to hurt themselves. It's about trying to distract themselves from the emotional pain they're experiencing by using physical pain. And maybe there's some weird parallel I have with that of like emotional masochism. Maybe it distracts me from what's physically going on. Um, or maybe it's distracting me from the grief. That could be part of it too. But this shame, this emotional masochism, I think was actually my biggest coping mechanism. And I didn't necessarily see it as that. I half did, but I half didn't. Um, I think I was starting to see it, but it had such a strong hold on me because I felt guilty and responsible too for other people. And I felt like if they were doing poorly, if they seemed to be um, in their own crisis or downward spiral, that I was responsible for that, and I blamed myself. And there was some truth to that. There was like a need to learn some lessons there, of course, but I turned it into this emotional masochism, um, feeling sick within myself, feeling disgusted, um, and kind of in some ways mentally torturing myself out of some sense of punishment. Um, but I think in some ways it was really just an escape. So that ended up being, I think, the biggest demon that sucked me in and pulled me back. And then when that sucks you in, it affects other things, affects your sleep, affects your stress levels, and then you're more vulnerable to these old habits, the other things that just kind of cling to you like lint, and then before you know it, you're doing all the things that you said you wouldn't do. So, and then if you're already shaming yourself, you're shaming yourself even more for that, for falling back into those old habits and creating more conflict, stress, and drama because of that. So it creates more shame, and then it just creates more of a spiral. Cycle of hell. And it seems like the only way to break that is to live and let live, to forgive yourself, accept exactly where you're at right now, and let the past go. Let that all go, so you can start fresh and try to learn and take those lessons with you. One of those lessons being, don't get sucked into that emotional masochism and shame again. Learn from it, but don't let it drag you back. So yeah, so if I could avoid doing that, then in theory I can just stay at the wall and the obstacle, whatever it is, and then go through this process of trying things out, experimenting, reevaluating, reiterating. And there's a certain point where I think too, it's not just a mental process. I've heard this by some people that I respect, but I think it's true too that it's also you're letting something guide you to. You could say it's your inner compass. You could say it's the universe or some kind of intelligence that's guiding you to, and you're listening, you're tuning into it, and you're paying attention, and you're trying to engage with that too, and you're letting that guide you. You're not just trying to do this on your own in that sense. Um, yeah, you're letting it help you work through this. So people can call it God, but I just see it as there's some kind of intelligence that sees the bigger picture, more than our ordinary mind, and you could say it's an intuitive aspect of ourselves, or you could say it's part of a greater whole, part of a greater intelligence. I think it's both. I think they're kind of the same thing. Um, and it doesn't really matter exactly what it is, but it is there. In my experience, there is something there, and it's not separate from us. But it has access to the whole thing. So, um, we don't want to handicap ourselves and exclude that from this process. So, yeah. And I guess that's all I can really say on it at this time, because yeah, I'm just working this out loud. So yeah, I wish I could say more. I think that kind of encapsulates a lot of the issue. So I guess I'll leave it at that.